meeting is being recorded.
We will also be recording this webinar, and so we will be able to send that back out to you afterwards. I just hit the record button, so it did skip the intro. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off and then introduce Lance Wheaton. Lance, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. I'm glad that Haley suggested might have been a month or so ago. She goes, we need to maybe check in a little bit early so we can make sure that we can get our screens correctly. And luckily I had Haley. I was using a new laptop and somehow I just couldn't get it started. But anyway, we are good to go. And I do appreciate you guys allowing me to come and speak about the drug-free workplace program. One thing that I learned, I guess I've been doing this now since almost 14 years in October. One thing that I learned early, probably in about my second year, is to maybe go in and take a look to see who you're going to be speaking in front of. And one thing that I was able to do is I looked up, public entity partners and what they actually do and the people that they represent, everyone that's out there listening. And I looked up your guys' mission statement, your vision. Your vision was, I thought was really interesting, making a difference in the lives of Tennessee public entity employees and the citizens they serve. And that's the one thing that I want to do is I'm in state government and I do serve the public and I work for you guys. And if at any time I can be of assistance, I want to be able to have that same type of vision and to be able to help you guys. However, the story behind wanting to know who you're speaking to came, like I was telling you, about my second year. Someone asked me to come out and speak about the Tennessee drug-free workplace, and I was pretty green behind the ears, as the old cliche says. And I went to it was a conference. You had one meeting on one side, one meeting on the other, and you had your case managers, risk managers, people such as yourself that was in the crowd, and then we had attorneys. So I would always, probably this is about my fourth or fifth speaking engagement, and I always ask, how many attorneys are in the crowd? Well, little did I realize, I was thinking, you would have maybe one or two attorneys that would come in, and this time, little did I realize, I really didn't look at the syllabus. This was made up of specific attorneys. And so when I asked that question, I would say about 99% of the 45 or 50 people that were in attendance raised their hands. And I thought to myself, and I didn't need a joke to come up with, I said, I bet I won't get past the second slide today because there are going to be a lot of questions that were going to be answered. Now, I did get past the fifth slide, but it was definitely an interesting day. But let's go ahead and get started. One thing, I don't know if you guys will allow this, maybe Haley or Ross, maybe you can answer this question, or just anybody out there. If you want to unmute yourself, it would be fine. What do you think the hottest topic that's been out there, besides COVID and everything going on, what do you think people have called me about? What drug? Does anybody want to unmute themselves and take a guess?
Lance, I'll make a pure guess and say it's marijuana and all the different strains, perhaps.
Absolutely, you hit you win.
I was listening to the Senate Judiciary today, and there was about a 2-hour debate on Delta 8 versus Delta 9.
Sure. Well, interesting enough, you are correct. It was really interesting. I do work from home a couple of days a week, and I do come into office. I am in the office today, and that was funny. Even my wife, she was telling me, she goes, wow, she couldn't believe the number of phone calls. We have employers, participants out there that are calling saying, hey, what about THC? What about CBD oil? What about this? Do we have to test for? This is the truth. I had a phone call today, and I'm not going to pick on which part of the state it's from, but it's from my part where I'm originally from East Tennessee. They called, and a lot of people are asking this. I'm not just picking on East Tennessee. They ask it in Middle and West as well. That was the big question they asked. Do we have to test for THC? We are thinking about taking that completely out of the testing? And the answer to that at this time, and I'll use that juncture when you work in state government, and you guys know this, at this time, you still have to test for marijuana. So you still have to test for THC. And I'll use this term at this time because it's my understanding the legislatures are currently working on the medicinal side and also the maybe the recreational side this year. So I don't know if we will hear of anything by this year, because typically what I've been told is if something is has been approved, and it has to go through different types of parties to make sure that or groups to make sure that it is approved. So I do not know anything at this time. Ross, have you heard anything in this matter or what they've talked about?
I haven't, and honestly, from a legislative standpoint, there is a lot of debate still on. I mean, in fact, there were two bills up this morning: one to regulate Delta 8, and the other one to outright ban it. So I think, as far as changes generally, it's still kind of per se unknown.
Sure. And typically when somebody asks me a question and says, well, hey, they might have been using Delta 8 or Delta 9 or CBD oil, could they have tested positive for just using that product? And the answer is, and what I have been told and what we have been told, is there's a possibility. And the reason I say that is because some of these CBD oil, or wherever you're getting some of these strains where you purchase these, have Amazon shipped to you. You just don't know how much THC is in that product. So could they test positive? Could they show up so many nanograms per milliliter over the limit? There's the possibility they could. And but as far as the Tennessee Drug-Free Workplace and a medical review officer, he or she will take a look at it, and if it's above that, if it's above or at the cutoff level, then it's going to be considered, to our understanding, a positive drug screen. So that is something to think about for your employees that are asking, can we use CBD oil? They may want to definitely be careful, because there is that possibility of testing positive for THC. We'll go ahead and get started here. I've got a little bit of a video that I don't think that anyone that works that would be covered under public entity partners would be in a situation like this, but they could be. When you take a look at, as you can see, there are 3 people down below, and I can't imagine what happened to the individual that was on the forklift, what happened to that individual. So as you can see, when you see an accident like this, or whether it's someone if you got someone driving a school bus under the influence, or fill in the blank, when you want to look at how big substance abuse in the workplace, this came from alcoholrehab.com, that approximately 75% of adult illicit drug users are employed, as are most binge and heavy alcohol users. This means that in nearly every workplace, there is a chance that there is at least one employee who has substance abuse problem. And one of the statistics that I received this year, and actually not just long ago, this was in 2020, and some people may say COVID might have had something to do with this, but it's been increasing every year. And the question was, how many people have died in the state of Tennessee from drug overdose? And in 2020, you're looking at 3,032 Tennesseans died of drug overdose. That represents a 45% increase from 2019. So basically, over the past 5 years, drug overdose deaths in Tennessee have consistently increased. But the range from the 2019 to 2020 was the largest yet. So that is, and when you take a look at, you're taking a 2019 report by, this is Quest Diagnostics. If you take a look at the post-accident positivity in the U.S. workforce, you're looking at 29% over 5 years, an increase. So, and then of course, you're looking at post-accident positivity among even your safety-sensitive workers. This should serve, as a warning to employers that employee drug use may increase the risk of a workforce accident or injuries. And you may see 2019, the 2020 reports on some of these, they've not come out due to COVID. Everything, has been delayed, but of course it's 2022, but these increases are subject to, what's going on as far as with COVID going on. We just didn't have a lot of statistics as far as the 2021. I've heard the 2020 and the 2021 should be coming out soon. Here are the different positivity rates by drug category. And we just got through talking about marijuana. The positivity has increased nearly 8% in urine testing. That's from 17 through 18 and up 17% since 2014. And that's possibly, and I'm going to take a estimated, since it's increasing, it's going to be increasing with these are drug screens that are across the United States, and there are some states that have allowed, for it to be recreational and medicinal. So I'm assuming that these rates are up as well. If you look at this was in 2019. The state of Tennessee, as far as drug use and addiction, it ranked out of the total score, it was 14th. But if you take a look under drug use and addiction, they ranked number 10. And then, of course, we talked about the overdose deaths. We're looking at what was reported in 2019. I just got through reading what was reported in 2020. So if you take a look, if you think about the statistic that I was giving you, about the 3/4 of adult illicit drug users, there's the possibility of someone working alongside you. When you start looking at these statistics, it will show that that there is some truth to some of those quotes. Then, of course, did you know that it cost employers, about 30, as far as substance abuse in the workplace, you're looking at 38 to 50% of your workers' compensation claims are related to workplace substance abuse. And these abusers, they incur medical costs 3 times higher than non-abusers. And then, of course, the impact on American businesses total more than $100 billion each year. Also, it costs employers an average of $7,000 in direct and indirect cost to replace an employee.
Hey, Lance, I was going to stop you real quick. I noticed we had a question, and I think it's from a few slides back in the chat.
Sure. Sure.
And I'm going to read it to you. It says, I get this question a lot. Will the switch to allow medicinally and or recreationally by some states change the way the state views a positive marijuana test? And I think that it may be if Tennessee changes it, but also maybe if somebody goes to another jurisdiction, that maybe they cross in line in Illinois, I think that does allow it, and then they come back here. Will that change the way the state views it? And if that answer is not, or excuse me, if that question is not accurate, feel free to put something in the chat by the person that asked it. But I will turn that over to you, Lance.
Okay, so I'm assuming if I'm understanding the question, if someone comes from a state that allows medicinal marijuana.
I assume that's maybe the question just says, will the switch to allow medicinal or recreational by other states change the way the state views a positive marijuana test?
Gotcha. Well, I do know at this time, if someone, let's say that they have a medicinal medical marijuana card and they're coming from another state. At this time, it's my understanding that, the state of Tennessee does not recognize that, to my knowledge, at this time. And it would still be considered, if they were to take a drug test and test positive for THC, then it would be considered a positive drug screen. Now, if Tennessee, let's say that they change, let's just say that might, I don't know that it will happen. Let's just say that it does. I really don't. That'll be something that the Bureau will really have to sit down and take a look at our rules and regs and really depend on what the legislature says about THC. Do you have anything, Ross, to add to that?
No, I agree with you that I think, yeah, currently it's my understanding that a positive test is a positive test, even if it was obtained legally elsewhere or used legally elsewhere. As far as the workplace in Tennessee, one thing I think we've often been asked to, just to kind of expound on this, is if somebody used marijuana perhaps 2 weeks ago, that maybe it's still in their system. Unless you tell me wrong, I think, again, the answer is a positive test is a positive test, and a medical review officer is not going to negate it simply because it wasn't used at work. As long as it's in their system, that's kind of all they look at. Is that correct?
That is my understanding as well. If it, like I said, if it's at or above those nanograms per milliliter, and I don't have that memorized right offhand, but it would be considered a positive screen.
And then to confirm again, and I'm looking at the chat, even if it's a CBD product that contains small amounts of THC, if somebody uses it in enough quantity where the THC registers in their system, again, even though it was a legal product, that's still, as long as the THC registers in their system above that legal limit, that's still a positive test, even though it came from CBD. Is that correct?
That is my understanding, coming from medical review officers. Yes.
I think that answers the question in the chat. So I wanted to interrupt you. I know you were talking about that a few minutes ago. So I'll try to keep an eye on the chat just to make sure that we kind of get those questions as they come. Thank you so much.
No problem. Yeah, feel free. If anybody sees something on here, ask a question. Feel free to do so. Most definitely. Also, substance abusers are a third less productive than other employees. Then, of course, you're looking at, think about the video. I don't know what happened to the individual, but 40% of industrial fatalities are linked to substance abuse as well. So we believe the solution for situations like this is a drug-free workplace program. We believe that it's good for employees. I know that I would feel I'm going to be a whole lot more productive if I'm going to a workplace that's safe, and then if I'm around people and we're more productive, it's going to be better morale. I mean, it's basically, I've heard people talk about, and I've spoken to, some different TOSHA and people that talk about there are employees that are out there that are sometimes concerned for their safety when they're in a workplace, in a manufacturing workplace, and they don't feel safe because they know that the woman or man beside them are using, and they're using a piece of equipment that could injure them. So I can imagine that that would definitely be stressful to be working in a workplace like that. The solution, of course, we believe is not only just a drug-free workplace program, but to participate in the state's Tennessee drug-free workplace program. And, when I first started working for it was known as the 5% premium, discount credit. That's what everyone wanted to talk about. But as I sat down and I worked and got to know some of the attorneys, they were saying, Lance, that the big thing that what employers really like is that it shifts the burden of proof. When an employer that if they don't belong to the Tennessee drug-free workplace, they have to prove that it was not their faulty equipment that caused the accident. But if they are participating in the program, that burden of proof is shifted to the employee, and that employee has to show clear and convincing evidence that it was not the drugs or alcohol that caused the accident. So that can be that can be really huge in a work comp claim. Also, if you choose not to hire someone, or excuse me, or if you choose to discipline or discharge someone that's in violation with the Tennessee drug-free workplace rules, it will be considered done for cause. So the one question, and as a matter of fact, I had this question asked to me today as well from a caller. The individual called and said, well, hey, we had someone that tested positive for methamphetamines. What do we need to do? And we encourage participants to follow their company policy. That's the first thing I asked her, what does your company policy state? And she says, well, our company, and she gave me, says, well, we encourage you guys to follow your company policy and to follow it and be fair and consistent. And you'll hear me talk about this later on as well when you're talking about writing a company policy, being fair and consistent. Here are the required aspects. Of course, the substance use recognition training for supervisors and for employees. It's 2 hours for supervisors and 1 hour for employees. Now, as of 2016, at one time you had to do the training every year. Now, if there are participants out there, if they still want to do training, they are welcome to do so. They can do it each year. However, it is not required as of July 1st of 2016. These supervisors or employees that's already gone through the training, they just have to sign off each year that they have been through the training. And then typically what we do is we encourage them to just keep that on record. Here are the types of testing that are required under the Tennessee Drug-Free Workplace Program. And as of yesterday or the day before, the pre-employment testing, and I'm going to let Ross go into this probably in a little more detail than myself, but Ross had sent us a question as to whether the Bureau of Workers' Compensation would certify local governments as drug-free workplaces if they perform the test permitted by the Tennessee and federal constitutions, but did not perform pre-employment or job applicant testing for all employees. And when I say all in bold and capital letters. And the answer to that was yes. So as long as safety-sensitive employees are tested pre-employment and the other categories of testing are performed. So Ross, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So this question came up through a lot of research that we had on our end for government employers. And those of you that are government employers, cities being included, hopefully understand that you are subject to the Fourth Amendment as employers. Kind of a quick overview, the Supreme Court has said that a drug test, whether it be a blood test or a urine test or even a hair sample, is a search for purposes of the Fourth Amendment. So typically a city would have to have a search warrant for these types of search. They have recognized that drug tests can be accomplished without a search warrant in certain positions or in certain scenarios. And the only one of these required tests on your screen right now that is problematic for government employers is the pre-employment testing. That is because the Supreme Court has recognized that cities cannot constitutionally test all job applicants. So while the drug-free workplace requires a drug test of all applicants, the U.S. Supreme Court has said that cities cannot constitutionally drug test all applicants. Instead, you can only drug test job applicants, and I should say job candidates that they have been offered a job if they are going to work in a safety-sensitive position. There's not an exhaustive list of safety-sensitive positions. We get that question a lot. But I tell people typically common sense will help you. So if it's going to be a school bus driver, a police officer, somebody dealing with children, if it's a Head Start program of some kind. Those can be considered safety sensitive. I would kind of encourage you to reach out to your attorney on which positions, if there's a question on well, I don't know if this position is safety sensitive or not. But the big thing to know there is that you cannot, the Constitution forbids you from drug testing all job applicants. You are only constitutionally allowed to drug test job applicants for safety sensitive positions. And we work with the Department of Labor and Lance. So even if you're not drug testing all job applicants, as long as you're only drug testing the safety sensitive applicants and the others, you can still be certified as a drug-free workplace, because it's the Constitution that says you can't test all candidates. So I hope I've made that clear. Don't want to take up Lance's time on that, but we did work with him, and we're happy to answer any questions at the end on that if needed.
And just to reiterate what Ross was saying, for these reasons, the Bureau advises governmental entities to seek, as Ross was stating, legal advice from an attorney. And governmental entities, they may voluntarily elect to be a member of the Bureau's Tennessee Drug-Free Workplace, provided that the governmental entity or entities maintains a compliance with all statutes and rules of the Tennessee Drug-Free Workplace to the extent permitted by law. So that was me reading from something. I didn't just come up with that on my own, but that is how we're looking at it. And at this, we are recognizing, as he said, so we answered yes to that question.
And Lance, we just got a question in the Q&A that said thoughts on monthly random drug testing for city employees.
Okay.
I can start if you'd like me to.
Go ahead. You can.
Well, I was going to say the random drug testing is not required by the drug-free workplace. I can tell you from a constitutional standpoint, if you're going to engage in random drug testing, it has to be random. You have to show that it's random. You can't, randomly choose to do the public works department today and randomly choose, clerical workers tomorrow. It has to be, random, and you have to be able to stick by it. Because it's not required by the Drug-Free Workplace Act or the Drug-Free Workplace Program, it's something that you'd be doing outside of that. So it's not necessary, but you're not forbidden from doing it as long as it is actually random. Anything else to add to that, Lance?
That is correct, and I should have brought that up. And if you see random drug testing is not allowed, is allowed but not required at this time. He is correct, and he's correct with we have a lot of participants, and it may be different in city, county government. We have a lot of participants out there that they want to say, I've got someone that I think is using drugs. I'm going to do a random drug test on them. And that's where you've got to, and I've had to, I get this question a lot. And I was like, well, now you may want to hold up. Random is not required under Tennessee drug free, but it appears to me that this may fit under reasonable suspicion. And you have to make that determination. But here are like I said, here are the 5 types of testing that are required. And like I said, I will be putting an asterisk besides the pre-employment for government limited to city, county government employees for safety sensitive. And a lot of people will ask, what does follow-up mean? And follow-up, this happened just not long ago. I had a participant that they had someone that tested positive. They chose to send this person to an EAP program. Once they completed that EAP program, they came back and they were able to drug test this individual under a follow-up drug plan. So that's what follow-up is. Then, of course, post-accident is a self-explanatory, reasonable suspicion as well. Routine fitness for duty. Let's say that you have an employee, he or she fits the definition of routine fitness for duty. They're required to take a drug test each year for a physical. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm taking a guess. Let's say a firefighter or a physician or a police officer. they may fit that definition of routine fitness for duty. Points to remember: we try to encourage everyone to understand that all testing and collection procedures must be done in accordance with the U.S. DOT guidelines. And of course, this was back in 2018 when they included the following. And then, of course, one thing we've talked about is must use a medical review officer. And a lot of these most of these certified labs have a medical review officer, if not all. And one thing about a medical review officer, he or she will speak to the employee that's tested positive first, and then that employee will give their their explanation of why they tested positive. And over the years, if I have spoken to this group before, or if anyone, the one that I have heard has to do with THC. Medical review officer called in a young man and told him that he tested positive for marijuana, and his explanation or / excuse was that he had been drinking milk from a cow that had been grazing in a marijuana patch. So that was his explanation, and I would assume that the medical review officer had to chuckle, and then he reports that to the supervisor or the whoever's over HR, and that's how that typically is taken care of. The medical review officer will talk to the employee first, and then get the explanation, then pass it on to the person that's in HR or the person that's in charge. And that's what I just got through mentioning. The results are reviewed with the employee first. And this is what I was talking about earlier. You want to avoid legal challenges. Courts favor employee drug testing that is based on procedures that are clear, fair, consistent, and communicated in a written policy. You can seek ideas from your staff if you choose to do so. And going back to the clear, fair, and consistent, you really have to, we really try to encourage participants to, sometimes you may have employees, one employee, he or she may be the best employee that you have, and the other one is not so, just barely gets by, shows up late. But let's say you end up testing both of these individuals, and one tests positive, or they both test positive, and you think to yourself, okay, I'm going to get rid of this person or discipline this person here, and I can get rid of the other one over here. You want to be careful. And most of you city county governments, you guys have got written policies that follow a guideline, but there are employers out there that may not have a written policy that explains what's going to happen to them if they do test positive. And there, I just got through talking, speak to an attorney about any legal aspects of your program. You want to be specific, spell out the consequences for violating the policy. And also, one thing in the rules and the statute, if an employee chooses to, if they refuse to submit to a drug or alcohol test, it is considered a positive test. And as I mentioned earlier, termination of an employee is not required. There's not anything in the rules and regs or the statute that states how to discipline the employee. It will be up to the participant.
Lance, we got another question in there. Sorry, and I'm a few slides behind on answering these. I've been typing some answers too. But somebody asked, they said, if an entity drug test following all accidents or incidents, are they overstepping their rights, and should they only drug test safety sensitive employees or CDL holders following accidents? Um, I'd happily turn it over to you. I think the answer is following an accident or an incident, drug testing anybody is fine because the accident itself will give you the probable cause necessary to perform the drug test.
That's correct. That's my understanding as well. Yes, it would. You would. This is how it's been explained to me. If let's say that I'm working for I'm a company and I'm just sitting in my office, and let's say that I got, I guess I need to be careful. I'm getting recorded here, but I'll go ahead and use myself as an example. Let's say that I got stoned at lunchtime, and let's say I came in and the light from the ceiling fell, and hit my head, made a gash in my head, and I'm sent to the emergency room. Well, typically, I'm still going to be, if they are a part of the Tennessee Drug Free Workplace, the company that I'm working for, you are still required to drug test me. Now, I may get, the burden of proof shifting is probably, it's not going to, the burden of, that's not going to come into effect. I'm still going to have to have my head sewed up, but I'm not supposed to be showing up for work with marijuana in my system as well. So if I'm over those nanograms per milliliter, then guess what? Then I'm going to be subject to a drug screen.
I think that answers the question. There's not another one with Q&A. So subject seeing something else in the chat, I'll let you move on. Thank you.
No problem. And one thing we don't want, to discriminate or look the other way. And that's what I was mentioning earlier. If you've got two employees or one you really like, you're letting one slide and you're not letting the other. Implement the program. You want to distribute copies of your written policy to all employees and post it in prominent locations. You want to give your employees a 60-day notice. And then we do have sample policy letters that are on the website. And as mentioned, they are samples. You do not have to use those specifically. And I'm sure with a lot of city, county government, you guys have your own sample policies.
Yeah, and Lance, on that, we're actually working with MTAS. We, as in Public Duty Partners, actually working with MTAS on a model policy for local governments to kind of take in some of the constitutional concerns. So I just add that for those people. Watch for that. I'll say the next couple of weeks just to give us some time, but it may be out sooner than that, just as a policy for local governments to model or use at their discretion.
Perfect. You can conduct meetings as far as educating your employees, answer questions and ease concerns, and advise of a starting date. Just let them know this is when it's going, and and typically with a lot of employers out there, whether you're a government entity or you're a private employer, a lot of these already have a drug-free workplace policy in place. However, it's not, that's not something that it may not be as precise as having to come up with sample policy letters to employees, giving 60-day notice, but they've already got some of these things in place, and it's not as difficult as some participants believe it is. I was like, hey, a lot of this you've already got in place, and some of these you're already testing for some of these drugs. It's as simple as implementing is filling out an application. It's a one-page application. It's easy to read and fill out. And the one thing that we are allowing employers to do, and we've been allowing this for the past, or just participants, you fill this out and you can scan it and email it back to us. This expedites the process. Now, if you still want to if you still want to fill it out and you still want to mail in the self-addressed stamped envelopes, you can choose to do so. But emailing is I believe it's a whole lot quicker. And also you can always add the insurance. You can also add the public entity partners to the email. And what we will do is when we send it back in a blast email, we'll provide it back to the city county government and also back to the public entity partners as well. And one thing you must remember as far as participating in the drug-free workplace program, it's important that you remember to renew your application each year. Because there are times when I can tell by the phone call that I get, if I get it from an employer or a participant or someone that's just not active at the time, hey, did we renew our application this past year? I pretty much know what has happened is someone unfortunately has gotten injured and they've tested positive, and they may have gone out and hired possibly an attorney. And if they don't, in a situation where they would not have been considered an active participant at the time if they did not renew their application. And one thing that we're trying to do for any of the city, county government entities and participants out there, we try to encourage you, if let's say that if someone retires and they've been taking care of the application for all these years, let us know so we can change in our system their email address. Because what we try to do is, just yesterday I sent out a blast email of about 300 and something emails letting participants know coming up in April that they're up for renewal. So if you give us if someone changes jobs, or we need to know so we can let you know you're coming up on renewal. But other than that, are there any questions?
Lance, we'll give it a few minutes in the Q&A in the chat box, but I don't see any right now.
Okay.
If there are questions moving down, is your contact info on the slide or in the deck? I assume people can contact you if they have questions afterwards.
Absolutely.
And then there was a question earlier too, whether you're willing to share this deck with all participants.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. I'll provide this to them.
And I would say if you want to email it to Haley, then anybody that wants it, we can send it out. There is another question here. Are prescription drug abuse addressed in the program?
Yes. Now, as far as the abuse goes, that's a situation where let's say that one of the drugs that are required to be tested for under the Tennessee Drug-Free Workplace Program, if they test positive for that, then the medical review officer, he or she will contact that individual. Now, the one thing that I do know has changed, and it has changed in the statute, and if you will give me just a second here, I will look this up for you. The one thing about prescription drugs, and this is in the state of Tennessee. Give me a second here. Here we go. This is and of course, I'm not interpreting this, but I'm going to read it to you guys. In 50-9-116, it says consideration of prescriptions issued within 6 months prior to a positive confirmed drug result. So this chapter, to the contrary, the medical review officer shall only consider prescriptions issued within 6 months prior to a positive confirmed drug result for purposes of determining a valid prescription and immunity from actions authorized by this chapter following a positive confirmed drug result. In other words, in layman's terms, that prescription has to be 6 months. And there have been in the past, it's my understanding that there have been, if you had a prescription that was written to you 2 years ago and you were taking it, it would have, it would have been considered, it's my understanding, as a negative screen. But now these prescription drugs, they have to be within 6 months. So as far as the medical review officer would have to determine whether the individual was abusing the drug or not.
All right, Lance, next question. We had somebody ask if your office has any training resources for employees and supervisors.
We do not have the training here at the office, but this is one thing: you can use any available resource out there, anything that's out there. But we currently do not have any type of training resources. However, it's meant to be flexible, and you can use anything out there you choose to. You can have someone to come in to do the training, or you can do the training yourselves if you choose to do so.
Judy Housley mentioned this in her comments about in the chat box, but we do have several resources available to members. We have our local government risk academy, where your member employees can log in and take training, and there is training available in that related to this topic. We also have information that you can print off and share with employees in our HR Hero product that all of our members have access to. When we follow up and send out a copy of the video and any materials, whether it's the PowerPoint or other model policies, we'll be sure to include some information about how to sign up for Local Government Risk Academy if you want to offer training to your employees through that, as well as signing up for HR Hero and EHS Hero.
Yeah, those sound like great resources.
Looks like
Lance, sorry, Haley. I was going to say a follow up on the prescription. It says, how can they consider prescriptions good for 6 months when the prescription bottle itself may be good for 1 year? Lance, I'll kind of save you on this one, and I think the answer is because that's what state law says. So even though your prescription may be refillable for up to a year, the state law that Lance read, which I think was 50-9-116 that typed in the chat, says that a medical review officer will only essentially negate a drug test or say it's not a violation if the prescription has been issued in the last 6 months.
That is correct, and they even define valid prescription in the word issued as well.
And then let's say another question: is there a list of facilities that do drug testing, Lance?
As far as typically what I do is I will ask what area they're from. I don't have a specific list because sometimes those lists, they will change. They'll come and go. If someone will call me, like I said, if they'll contact me and say, hey, I'm looking at this area, I may be able to give them a couple of names. I know, for example, I recall this. I know Work Care Resources out in West Tennessee. I do know that they do the testing and collection as well. Like I said, it just really depends on what part of the state you're from. I can try to find some if they call and they ask. But to be honest with you, I've had participants tell me, how I've gotten a larger list, and I would say, well, how? And we just contact our local emergency room hospital, and we ask them, if someone is injured and you have to do a drug screen, who do you get to come in and do this? And sometimes they will get a list of maybe 2 or 3 or up to 5 or 6, and then you can contact those individuals.
Let's see. Lori, I'm not sure. I guess there was Lori, is that a statement to us? I don't know if that's a question, but one of the cities said they've been told they can't do drug testing. Or they said we can't test because we don't have a contract to do drug testing. And I think, I'm not sure if this is a question, but I would say that you as a city shouldn't be drug testing your own employees. So you shouldn't be performing the drug test. Typically, these need to be a certified drug testing laboratory. So anybody that's sent for a drug test, at least we would recommend from the PEP side, and Lance, I'll let you follow up, that you actually send them to a facility that drug tests that's certified, and then that facility would send the results back to the employer.
Yes, that's what we encourage you to do. That, that you would want to use encourage participants, and that's why they provide the benefits of the program is by specifically using a certified lab to make sure that the collection and the testing is done correctly.
Okay, so and they followed up. They said the hospital said they can't drug test for them, and I think that's probably correct. The hospital,
Yes.
I think what Lance is saying is the hospital may be able to give you a list of other facilities that do drug tests, but the hospital probably would not do the drug test for you.
That's correct. That is correct.
All right, Lance, we got another one. We got another one of whether the city can, or the employer, I should say, can collect the sample and then send it to a lab. Any advice on that one?
The collection and testing, the collection, as I mentioned, all testing and collection, and this is what we're talking about, the collection must be done in accordance with US DOT guidelines. So you must collect it in a manner using those same speed, and that chain of custody and all of that has to be done. So I'm not telling you can't, because you may be certified to do that, or you may have someone on staff that's certified to do that, but you may want to make sure that you're doing that in accordance with the US DOT guidelines. That's preparing the place, that's the bathroom. It's preparing the water. It's all of those things. It can be a lengthy process.
And I will say, for I think it was Elaine, you answered this, or you asked this question in the chat. We have gotten the question before of, well, what if I order an employee for a valid reason to go submit to a drug test and they just refuse to do so? Maybe they're supposed to. Well, if they're certainly impaired, they're not going to drive themselves, but you as an employer can drive them to a facility. Or if you, let's say it's a police officer candidate and it's a safety sensitive position, and you ask them to go and that person refuses to go, you can use that refusal as a basis for a reason to not hire them, or in some instances to terminate them. So that refusal to submit to a drug test can be used as a for cause termination if it's a valid request for a drug test. Any other questions?
I have to say that this is probably the most questions of any webinar that we've done, and we really appreciate your engagement and interest in the topic. You never know which topics are going to be as well received, and it's exciting to see this much engagement. Obviously, there were a lot of questions, so we will try to kind of compile those and make sure that we're sending out information to help you with those. There were a lot of questions about the resources that are available, HR Hero or our DVD library or Local Government Risk Academy. We'll make sure that we send out information about that. We do have one more question from Judy Housley. If a work-related injury is reported several days later, do you still test on report is the question. So actually, there's two more questions. Can the city do a drug test and only if the employee tests positive, then send them to the certified lab?
Now, I asked that one more time about the first question.
So the first question is, if a work-related injury is reported several days later, do you still test? Can you still do the drug test at that point?
Yeah. Now, the answer to that is yes, because that's probably when it has been reported. So the injured employee shall submit a testing when the injury is reported to the employer. Now, here's the thing that let's say that that's what it says in the rules. What can happen there is, let's say if someone gets hurt and they were drinking the night before, or they were, using drugs, and hopefully it will get out of their system by then. But you are still required, when it is reported to you, you still are required to drug test that individual when
And
it's
then,
been reported.
and then the second question is, can the city do a drug test and only if the employee tests positive, then send that employee to a certified lab to be tested again? That one's
Uh, uh, and I'm assuming we're talking about a safety sensitive, not just a. We're going to
Yeah,
assume
and like I
safety.
think the question, even if it's post-accident or anything, can the city perform the drug test and then upon a positive send to a certified lab?
I think you've got to send them to the certified lab once they're injured. Like I said, all testing collection has to be done in those guidelines.
Yeah, and I
So
was going to agree with Lance just from a purely legal standpoint. I guess my fear, and I would check with your local attorney certainly. With that disclaimer, I would say my
sure.
fear, if PEP, if I was going to advise them on it, I would tell them to refrain from performing themselves, because if they don't do it within the US DOT guidelines, they could certainly get a false positive or false negative, and then you're using that as the basis for drug testing and not the initial reason. So I would probably recommend staying away from performing the test yourselves.
Correct. I'm sorry about that. I thought that was on a pre-employment screen. I'm sorry. This was a post-accident. Sorry.
Well, I think it was just kind of in general.
General. Okay.
Yeah. So
But yeah, I would always encourage definitely seek the advice of your counsel. But the going with the certified lab will help with the burden of proof shifting, if that's what happens.
And I don't see any more questions. But Lance, like I said, if you'll send that deck over, through Haley, we'll make that available to everyone. And certainly,
Okay.
there were a lot of questions about the constitutional concerns in local governments. We're also happy to answer those. If anybody wants to reach out afterwards, certainly reach out to us, reach out to the department, because the department is who certifies you as a drug-free workplace. PEP gives you the credit on the back end. And we worked with Lance just yesterday on the constitutional concerns. So that may raise a lot of questions, but feel free to reach out to either entity, and we'll help you kind of navigate those as permitted.
Thank you, Lance. And if you enjoyed today's webinar, we hope that you'll sign up for our next webinar, which is scheduled on May 4th. Michael Fan will be presenting how to build a risk management culture with leadership. And then after that webinar on May 25th, we'll have another webinar, local government employment claims you can avoid. So look in our newsletter for information for that, or on our website to sign up. And we appreciate your time today. We appreciate your engagement. We appreciate your questions. We will stay on the line for a little bit longer, just to make sure if anybody has any other follow-up questions that we capture those. But otherwise, you're free to drop off the webinar whenever it works for you. Thank you.
Lance, thank you so much for your time.
Hey, I appreciate you guys. Like I said, anything in the future, if there are some that if you guys want to do it again later on in the year, just feel free to, you've got my contact information.
Will do. And like I said, we're working with MTAS now that we've gotten the guidance from the department. We are working with MTAS on a policy too. So you've really helped us resolve that big area of questions about the concerns we had.
Good.
So we appreciate it. Haley, if you don't need anything, I'm going to jump off.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
All right. Take care, guys. Y'all have a great day.
Dude, thank you.